Hey guys, tonight we are going to take a little trip back in time, but not to the parts of history you usually see in the movies. You know, those scenes where the knight looks pristine in shining armor and the king sits on a throne that somehow stays dust free. Yeah, we're going to look behind that curtain. Imagine for a moment that you are waking up, but instead of the soft chime of your smartphone, you're jolted awake by the smell of wood smoke, unwashed wool, and a certain dampness in the air that never quite goes away. You've got a long day ahead of you, and trust me, by the time we're done exploring the career paths available to you in the Middle Ages, you'll realize that your current Monday morning emails are basically a spa day in comparison. You probably wouldn't survive a single shift in the roles we're about to discuss, mostly because your modern senses would simply quit on you within the first 10 minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. It's always peaceful to see how far these stories travel while the world sleeps. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing in the dim, flickering light of a royal bedchamber. The air is heavy with the scent of expensive beeswax candles and the faint underlying tang of a chamber pot that's been used once too often. You aren't the king, of course. You are the groom of the stool. In the hierarchy of the court, you are technically a high ranking official, a nobleman even, but your job description is, well, it's intimate. You are the person responsible for the king's necessary business. When the monarch feels the call of nature, you are there with the velvet lined commode, the stool, and most importantly, you are there with the washcloths. You spend your morning waiting for a king to finish his morning routine, and then you have the distinct honor of inspecting the results. It sounds like a nightmare, doesn't it? Spending your career staring into a bucket used by a man who eats way too much venison and spiced wine. But here's the kicker. In the medieval and Tudor mind, this was the ultimate promotion. You are the only person who gets hours of uninterrupted private time with the most powerful man in the kingdom. While you're performing the most undignified task imaginable, you're also whispering in the king's ear about policy, land grants, and who's plotting against him. You're basically the ultimate power behind the throne, even if that throne happens to have a hole in the middle. Historians still debate whether the groom of the stool held more actual political influence than the king's own advisors, simply because of the sheer amount of quality time they shared. But let's step out of the palace, because most of us wouldn't be lucky enough to hold a royal towel. Instead, imagine you are walking through a village in the 14th century. The ground is soft, not with grass, but with a mixture of mud, animal waste, and discarded rushes from the floors of houses. You're heading toward your first real job of the day, the fuller. Now, everyone likes clean clothes, right? You probably have a bottle of lavender-scented detergent in your laundry room. In the medieval period, detergent was a much more organic affair. As a fuller, you spend your entire day standing in a massive wooden vat. You aren't alone. You're surrounded by heavy raw wool blankets that have just been woven. These blankets are full of natural oils, grease, and dirt that need to be stripped away so the wool can be thickened and cleaned. And what is the miracle cleaning agent of the Middle Ages? Human urine. Specifically, stale urine that's been sitting out for a few days to reach peak ammonia levels. You spend 10 to 12 hours a day, knee deep in a vat of aged pee, treading on the fabric with your bare feet. It's like the world's worst version of stomping grapes for wine. Your skin is constantly pruned, the smell is etched into your very soul, and your neighbors probably give you a very wide berth at the local tavern. You hear the rhythmic squelch squelch of your own feet, and you start to wonder if there's a better way to make a living. You look over at the local blacksmith, and for a second, the fire looks inviting. But then you remember that the blacksmith is currently dealing with a horse that hasn't been washed since the Crusades and a bellows system that requires the arm strength of an Olympic weightlifter just to keep the fire hot enough to beat iron into shape. There is no such thing easy job here. Everything is manual, everything is heavy, and almost everything smells like something that died 3 weeks ago. You might think, well, at least I could work in the kitchen. But medieval kitchens weren't the cozy, rustic spaces we see in lifestyle magazines. They were hellscapes of heat and smoke. You'd likely be a spit boy, a child or a low level servant whose sole job is to sit next to a roaring hearth and turn a heavy iron spit for hours on end. You are roasting a pig, but you're also roasting yourself. The grease pops and sizzles, landing on your skin, and the smoke stings your eyes until you're crying tears that dry before they can even hit your cheeks. It's a mindless, exhausting, and dangerously hot existence. If you stop turning, the meat burns, and the head cook, a man with a temper as hot as his ovens, will likely give you a clip round the ear that leaves your head ringing for the rest of the week. There's a strange irony in these jobs. The more essential the task was to making society function, cleaning clothes, preparing food, disposing of waste, the more disgusting it was considered to be. We tend to think of the medieval era as a time of knights and dragons, but it was actually a time of incredibly hardworking people doing things that would make a modern person faint. You're probably lying in your bed right now, feeling the smooth texture of your sheets. Those sheets were made, cleaned, and maintained by people whose hands were permanently stained and whose backs were perpetually bent. As you walk further into this imagined village, the sun starts to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the timber-framed houses. The air cools down, but it doesn't get fresher. You see a man approaching with a large barrel on a cart. He's covered in a layer of grime so thick it looks like a second skin. This is the gong farmer, but we'll get to him soon. For now, just think about the sheer physical weight of the world back then. There were no buttons to press, no engines to start. If something needed to move, you moved it. If something needed to be cleaned, you scrubbed it until your knuckles bled. The historians often argue about the quality of life for these workers. Some say that despite the grime, there was a sense of community, a shared struggle that we've lost in our isolated digital world. Others point out that most of these people wouldn't have lived past 40, their bodies simply worn out by the friction of existence. You can almost feel that exhaustion in your own bones as you listen to the distant sound of a church bell marking the end of the workday. But for many, the work doesn't end when the sun goes down. For the night soil men and the watchmen, the day is only just beginning. You pull your thin wool cloak tighter around your shoulders, feeling the itch of the fabric, wool that was probably trodden by a fuller in a vat of urine just a few months ago. It's a cycle of survival that never stops. And as you close your eyes in this dream of the past, you realize that even the worst job today is a luxury compared to the absolute worst of the Middle Ages. But we've only just scratched the surface. The night is long, and there are many more vats to tread and spits to turn before the dawn breaks. As the moon climbs higher over the timbered rooftops of our medieval town, the air shifts from the smoky haze of the day to a damp, heavy chill. You've survived your imaginary shift as a fuller, but the grime of history doesn't wash off with a simple splash of water. You are now moving through the narrow alleys where the upper stories of the houses lean in so close they almost touch, blocking out the stars. This is where the chemistry of the Middle Ages truly happens, far away from the sterile labs we know today. You find yourself standing outside a workshop where the smell of ammonia has intensified tenfold. This is the realm of the dyer and the leather tanner, and if you thought the fuller's vat was bad, you might want to pull that blanket a little closer to your chin. In this era, if you want your tunic to be a vibrant shade of blue or a deep, regal purple, someone has to pay the price in sweat and stench. To get those dyes to actually stick to the fabric, a process called mordanting, you need a chemical bridge. And in the absence of industrial factories, that bridge was once again provided by the human body. You are now tasked with collecting liquid gold from the public jars placed at street corners. Your job is to lug these heavy, sloshing ceramic pots back to the vats. The stale urine is essential because, as it breaks down, it produces the high pH levels needed to dissolve certain dyes like woad. You spend hours stirring these mixtures with long wooden poles, the fumes rising up to sting your throat and coat your lungs. It's a slow, rhythmic labor, a silent dance with the refuse of the city. Historians often debate how these workers managed to live within the city walls, as many towns eventually passed laws forcing tanners and dyers to move downstream or to the outskirts because the smell was literally considered miasma, a poisonous air that people believed caused disease. You are essentially a social pariah for the sake of fashion. But there's a strange, quiet dignity in it, a weird irony that the most beautiful garments worn by the nobility started their journey in the most repulsive conditions imaginable. You look down at your hands in the moonlight and see them stained a permanent, ghostly shade of indigo. No matter how hard you scrub, that color and that scent is your shadow. It follows you into the tavern, it follows you home. But let's pivot from the liquids to the solids. Imagine you've been promoted to the role of a tanner. Leather is everywhere in your world: shoes, saddles, armor, water canteens. To make animal hides supple enough to use, you have to remove every scrap of flesh and hair. After soaking the hides in lime, you have to perform a process called baiting. This involves smearing the hides with a concoction of dog feces or bird droppings mixed with water. Why? Because the enzymes in the dung soften the leather. You are elbow deep in a vat of fermented waste, kneading animal skins like you're making the world's most cursed sourdough bread. The heat generated by the fermentation process makes the vat uncomfortably warm, a tepid, bubbling stew of biology that you have to inhabit for hours on end. You probably wouldn't survive the first hour without gagging, but for the medieval worker, this was just the smell of a paycheck. You learn to breathe through your mouth, to let your mind drift away to better places, maybe to the green fields beyond the city walls or the sound of the river. Every now and then, a supervisor yells at you to pick up the pace. There are no unions here, no safety goggles, and certainly no scented soap for when you clock out. You are a human machine, processing the debris of life into the infrastructure of civilization. It's funny, in a dark sort of way, how we romanticize the simpler times. We imagine the craftsmanship of a hand-tooled leather pouch, but we never imagine the guy who had to spend 3 weeks soaking it in pigeon poop to get it that soft. There's a certain miyame, a gentle irony, in knowing that the fine leather of a knight's scabbard likely smelled worse than the battlefield it was headed toward. You might find yourself wondering if the people of the past just had better noses than we do, or if they simply accepted that life was an olfactory assault from birth to death. Some scholars suggest that the ubiquitous smell of wood smoke acted as a sort of natural Febreze, masking the more pungent aromas of industry. But let's be honest, wood smoke can only do so much against a vat of fermented dog dung. As you lean against the cold stone wall of the tannery, taking a momentary break, you hear the distant, heavy thud of a water wheel. It reminds you that even the high-tech solutions of the day were grueling. If you weren't working with waste, you were working with gravity and grit. You think about the treadmill cranes used to build cathedrals, massive wooden wheels where men would walk for miles inside a giant hamster cage, hundreds of feet in the air, just to lift a single block of stone. One slip of a foot, one moment of vertigo, and the whole mechanism could spin out of control, turning the worker into a human catapult. It's a reminder that in the Middle Ages, work-life balance usually meant not falling to your death before sundown. The night air is getting even colder now, and the silence of the town is only broken by the occasional bark of a stray dog, perhaps a donor for the tannery's next batch of baiting mixture. You start to realize that every comfort you have in the modern world is built on a foundation of these absolute worst jobs. The vibrant colors of your clothes, the softness of your shoes, the very structure of the buildings you live in. It all began with someone standing in a vat or walking in a wheel. You feel a sense of heaviness in your limbs, a reflected exhaustion from these ancestors who never knew the luxury of a weekend. The path ahead is still dark, and we have many more layers of the medieval workforce to peel back. From the depths of the gong pits to the heights of the cathedral spires, the story of work is the story of human endurance. But for now, just let the rhythmic stirring of that imaginary dye vat lull you. The smells are fading, the cold is becoming a cozy numbness, and the world of the 14th century is slowly tucking itself in, even if the work never truly ends. Just keep your eyes closed, listen to the slow thud of the distant water wheel, and remember, at least you aren't the one who has to empty the jars at the street corner tomorrow morning. The damp chill of the tannery begins to fade as you move deeper into the heart of a medieval industrial site. The sound of the water wheel we heard earlier is growing louder, a rhythmic, low frequency thump thump that vibrates through the soles of your thin leather shoes. You're no longer knee deep in liquids. Instead, you find yourself standing before a massive wooden structure that looks like a cross between a windmill and a torture device. This is the Great Treadmill, and your job today is to be the engine. While the wealthy are tucked away in their feather beds, you are stepping into a giant wooden wheel about 20 feet in diameter. You aren't walking to get somewhere just to keep the world turning. Your task is to provide the torque needed to grind grain into flour or to hoist heavy timber up to the scaffolding of a rising cathedral. You step onto the wooden slats and the wheel groans under your weight. As you start to walk, the momentum takes over. It's a relentless pace. If you go too slow, the machinery stalls. If you go too fast, you risk losing your footing and being tossed around like a rag doll inside a dryer. It is the ultimate hamster wheel existence. You walk for miles every shift, yet you never leave the spot where you started. Your calves are burning, your breath comes in ragged gasps, and the air is thick with the fine combustible dust of the flour mill. You probably wouldn't survive the sheer monotony, let alone the physical strain. It's the kind of work that turns a man into a ghost long before he's actually dead. Historians often debate how common these treadwheels were, but records from cathedral construction sites across Europe show they were the cranes of the era. There's a certain miame, a quiet irony, in the fact that the most spiritual, heaven-reaching buildings were constructed using the back-breaking, repetitive labor of men who spent their days looking at nothing but the wooden slat in front of their faces. You're building a monument to God, but your reality is a repetitive loop of gravity and sweat. Every now and then, a fellow worker might hum a low tune to keep the rhythm, a work song that acts as a medieval metronome. You find yourself matching your steps to the beat, your mind slipping into a trance-like state just to escape the reality of the wooden cage. And speaking of flour, let's talk about the grit of it all. As you walk, you watch the giant millstones grinding together. They aren't perfect. Small fragments of stone break off and mix with the grain, meaning that every loaf of bread produced by your labor contains a healthy dose of granite. This is why when archaeologists look at medieval skulls, the teeth are often worn down to the gums. You're working yourself to the bone to provide bread that in turn grinds down the teeth of everyone who eats it. It's a closed loop of wear and tear. You might find yourself joking with a coworker about how the local baker's special ingredient is just the floor of the quarry, a bit of dark humor to pass the hours of treading. The dust in the air is another hidden danger. In the dim light of the mill, you see the motes dancing in the shafts of moonlight, but you also feel them coating your throat. Miller's lung was a very real thing, though they didn't have a name for it then. You just knew that after a few years in the wheel, you'd have a cough that never quite went away. The historians like to point out that millers were often the most distrusted people in the village, accused of stealing a bit of grain here and there. But looking at the state of your lungs and your knees, you feel like the village owes you a lot more than a handful of wheat. You hear a sharp crack, the sound of a wooden gear shifting, and for a second, the wheel jerks. Your heart skips a beat. If the rope snaps or the brake fails, the weight of the stone could spin this wheel backward at terrifying speeds. You've heard stories of men who were caught in the spokes, a workplace accident that usually ended with a quiet burial behind the church. There are no safety harnesses here. Your only protection is your own grip and the steady, tired rhythm of your legs. It makes that modern office chair and the ergonomic keyboard seem like alien artifacts from a utopian future, doesn't it? As the hours crawl by, the physical world begins to blur. The thump thump of the machinery becomes the heartbeat of your universe. You start to lose track of whether you've been walking for 2 hours or 10. The only thing that matters is the next step. Right, left, right, left. The wooden slats are worn smooth by thousands of feet that came before yours, a polished history of human effort. You think about the groom of the stool we met earlier, and strangely, you almost envy him. At least he got to sit down. You, on the other hand, are a human motor, a biological spark plug in a world made of oak and iron. Eventually, the signal is given to stop. The wheel slows, creaking in protest as the brake is applied. You step out, your legs feeling like jelly, the ground beneath you feeling strangely unmoving and wrong. Your ears are ringing with the silence. You walk out into the cool night air, the flower dust on your skin making you look like a pale specter in the moonlight. You've survived another shift in the wheel, but you know that tomorrow, the grain will still need grinding, the stones will still need lifting, and the wheel will be waiting for its engine. As you lie down on a pile of straw in the corner of the mill, the rhythmic vibration of the water wheel still echoing in your bones, you realize that the Middle Ages wasn't just built on faith and conquest. It was built on the steady, exhausting pace of the treadmill. The world is quiet now, save for the distant hoot of an owl and the soft rustle of the wind through the grain fields. Let your heavy limbs sink into the straw. Feel the phantom movement of the wheel fading away, replaced by a deep, heavy stillness. You've walked miles tonight without moving an inch, and now it's finally time to rest. The wheel has stopped, the day is done, and the long, dark history of the night is just getting started. The rhythmic vibration of the millstones slowly fades, replaced by a silence so profound it feels heavy. You leave the dusty air of the flour mill behind, stepping out into the midnight streets of a medieval city. The air here is different. It's cold, sharp, and carries a scent that makes the ammonia of the dye vats feel like a perfume. You see a flicker of lantern light near a narrow alleyway, and a group of men dressed in the thickest, grimiest leather you've ever seen. You've just joined the ranks of the gong farmers. Now, don't let the name fool you. There are no rolling green fields or golden wheat here. Gong is the old word for human waste, and you are the farmer tasked with harvesting it from the deep, dark pits beneath the city's latrines. This is a job that strictly begins when the sun goes down and must be finished before the first light of dawn. Local laws are very clear. Nobody wants to see, smell, or even acknowledge your existence during the day. You are the invisible ghost of the city's digestive system. You find yourself standing at the edge of a cesspit, a stone-lined hole that has been collecting the contributions of an entire neighborhood for months. Your tool is a simple wooden bucket and a rope. One of your crew members descends a rickety ladder into the pit, and soon it's your turn. You probably wouldn't survive the first descent. The concentrated methane and sulfur fumes are so thick they can literally knock a man unconscious or, in some cases, cause a stray spark from a lantern to trigger a small explosion. You are now waist deep in the night soil. It's a slow, grueling process of filling buckets and hauling them up to a waiting cart. The weight is immense and the splash is unavoidable. You've heard the dark jokes from your fellow workers about the treasures people accidentally drop down here, from silver coins to the occasional wedding ring, but mostly it's just relentless, back-breaking muck. There's a certain Mia May, a grim irony in the fact that you are the most essential person for the city's health. Yet, if you were to walk into a bakery tomorrow morning, you'd be chased out with stones. You are the guardian against the plague, the man who keeps the miasma at bay, and your reward is a life lived in the shadows and a smell that no amount of scrubbing will ever truly remove. Historians often point out that gong farmers were actually paid quite well, sometimes 3 or 4 times the wage of a standard laborer. It was hazard pay in its purest form. You realize that you're carrying the literal weight of the city's excess on your shoulders, one bucket at a time. The cart is finally full, and now comes the long walk to the city gates. You have to dump this crop in designated fields outside the walls, where it will be used as fertilizer to grow the very grain you were grinding in the treadmill earlier tonight. It's the circle of life, stripped of all its majesty and replaced with a heavy wooden cart and a long, dark road. As you walk beside the creaking wheels, the sound of the cart becomes a sort of lullaby. The splashing of the liquid, the rhythmic thud of the horse's hooves on the cobblestones, the cool night breeze finally beginning to clear the worst of the scent from your nostrils. You look up at the stars and realize that while the rest of the world is dreaming of nights and glory, you are seeing the world exactly as it is, raw, messy, and incredibly fragile. There is a strange peace in this solitude. The city is yours at this hour. You are the only witness to its quietest moments. The historians still debate whether the sheer physical toll of this job was worse than the social stigma. But as you reach the dumping grounds and begin the final task of the night, you don't care much for status. You only care about the warmth of a fire and the chance to close your eyes. You feel the fatigue deep in your joints, a heavy, sinking sensation that pulls at your heart. The work is almost done. The pits are empty, the fields are fed, and the sun is still a few hours away. You find a dry patch of grass far from the cart, wrapping your heavy leather coat around you. The smell is still there, a faint ghost of the night's labor, but it's being overtaken by the scent of damp earth and the coming morning dew. Let your breath slow down. Imagine the weight of those buckets being lifted off your arms, leaving them feeling light, almost floating. The dark alleys of the city are far away now. The gong farmer's night is over, and the world is safe for another day. Close your eyes, listen to the distant rustle of the wind through the trees, and let the darkness carry you into a sleep that is deep, quiet, and completely earned. As the first hint of gray begins to bleed into the horizon, the heavy, pungent air of the cesspits is replaced by something even more suffocating. You aren't allowed to go home yet. Instead, you are drawn toward the outskirts of the town, where the wind usually carries the scents away from the wealthy. You find yourself standing before a cluster of low, soot-stained buildings. This is the quarter of the cloth dyers and the wool preparers, but specifically, you've been assigned to the most avoided corner of it, the woad vat and the alum boilers. If you thought your skin was stained before, you haven't seen anything yet. Your job today involves the extraction of color. In the medieval world, a deep, lasting blue is a luxury, but the process of creating it is an absolute nightmare of chemistry and endurance. You are surrounded by massive wooden tubs filled with crushed woad leaves, which have been fermented for weeks. The smell is often described by historians as a mixture of rotting cabbage and ancient locker rooms. To make the dye take, you have to stir these thick, bubbling slurps of sludge for hours on end. The steam rises in thick blue-tinted clouds, coating your face, your hair, and your lungs in a fine, sticky residue. You probably wouldn't survive the respiratory assault. By midday, your spit would be blue, and your vision would be swimming from the fumes of the fermenting vegetation. There is a certain miame, a quiet, bitter irony in this work. You are the person responsible for the beautiful, sky-colored gowns worn by the merchant's daughters at the Sunday feast. Yet your own hands are stained a permanent, deathly shade of indigo that makes you look like a walking corpse. In many medieval towns, dyers were actually forbidden from drawing water from the public wells because their very presence was seen as a source of pollution. You are a creator of beauty who is treated like a harbinger of filth. You spend your life turning white wool into something vibrant, while your own life becomes increasingly gray and isolated. Historians often debate the long-term health effects of these medieval industrial zones. They've found that the soil around these ancient dye works is still saturated with heavy metals and toxins centuries later. You are breathing in a cocktail of wood ash lye, stale urine, and concentrated plant acids. Every time you plunge your long wooden paddle into the vat, the resistance of the thickening sludge sends a jolt of pain through your shoulders. It's like trying to row a boat through wet cement. You find yourself leaning against the rim of the vat, your head spinning, listening to the rhythmic slop squelch of the dye as it settles. But there's an even weirder job nearby. The leather dresser. While you deal with the blue sludge, he is dealing with the alum. To make leather white and soft for expensive gloves, it has to be treated in a solution of alum and salt. But the secret ingredient? Egg yolks. Thousands of them. You watch as a fellow worker spends his entire day cracking eggs into a vat and then treading on the leather hides with his bare feet, mixing the yolk into the skin. It's a surreal, slippery mess. A high-protein swamp that feels like walking on a million tiny gelatinous eyeballs. You might share a weary, blue-tinted smile with him as he slips and slides in his vat. A bit of dark humor is the only thing that keeps the exhaustion from turning into total despair. The heat in the dye house is relentless. Huge cauldrons of water are kept at a constant boil to prepare the mordants. You are constantly moving between the freezing dampness of the rinsing stream and the sweltering heat of the vats. Your skin is perpetually cracked and raw, the dye seeping into the fissures of your knuckles until your hands look like a topographical map of a strange blue planet. You've heard the masters talk about how the color must be true, but as you watch the blue liquid drip from your elbows, you wonder if anything about this life is true besides the ache in your back. As the sun finally pulls itself over the horizon, the master dyer calls for a break. You step outside, and the fresh morning air feels almost like a physical blow to your system. It's too clean, too sharp. You look at your reflection in a puddle and see a stranger, a blue-faced man with tired eyes and soot-stained clothes. You are a vital cog in the great machine of medieval commerce, a man who provides the status symbols of the era, and yet you are invisible. You realize that the absolute worst jobs aren't just about the smell or the grime, they're about the way they change you, staining you inside and out until you no longer fit in the world you're helping to build. The sound of the boiling cauldrons fades into a low, white noise as you find a corner of the drying shed to rest. The wool hanging above you drips blue droplets onto the floor, a slow, rhythmic tap, tap, tap that matches the slowing beat of your heart. Let the warmth of the steam still lingering on your skin become a heavy blanket. The smell of the woad is fading now, replaced by the simple, honest scent of drying wool. Your hands are heavy, your mind is a blur of indigo, and the world of the morning is beginning to wake up without you. Sink into the shadows of the shed, let the blue mist of the vats cloud your vision, and drift into a dream where the world is colorless, quiet, and perfectly still. As the blue mist of the dye works drifts away, you find yourself wandering toward a much quieter, though no less unsettling corner of the medieval economy. The sun is higher now, but you aren't heading for the bustling market. Instead, you are walking toward the edge of a stagnant, reed-choked pond on the outskirts of the village. You are carrying a simple wicker basket and a long stick, but your most important piece of equipment is actually your own body. Welcome to the life of a leech gatherer. This isn't a job for the squeamish or the faint of heart. It's a job for those who are willing to become a literal buffet for the sake of a few coins. In the Middle Ages and well into the Victorian era, leeches were the aspirant of the day. Every physician and barber surgeon needed a steady supply for bloodletting, the practice of balancing the body's humors by draining out the excess blood. But leeches don't just jump into a jar. They need to be lured. Your job is to wade into the murky, waist-deep water wearing nothing but a short tunic and wait. You aren't fishing with a line. You are the bait. You stand perfectly still in the cold, silty mud, feeling the water insects skim against your skin until you feel that unmistakable, sharp little pinch. Then another, and another. You probably wouldn't survive the psychological toll of watching dozens of slimy, segmented worms latch onto your legs and begin to bloat with your own blood. There is a certain mia may, a soft, biting irony in this profession. You are providing the cure for the sick and the wealthy, yet you are slowly draining your own vitality to do it. By the time you step out of the pond, your legs are covered in small, triangular bite marks that won't stop bleeding because of the anticoagulant the leeches inject. Historians often point out that long-term leech gatherers suffered from chronic anemia, their faces as pale as the flour-dusted miller we met earlier. You are a walking pharmacy, but one that is constantly running out of stock. You spend your afternoons carefully peeling the fat, satiated worms off your skin and dropping them into your basket, knowing that for every dozen you catch, you've lost a little more of your own strength to the bog. Historians still debate whether the people of the past understood the physical toll of this job, or if they simply viewed it as another form of gathering, like picking berries, just with more biting. You walk back toward the town, your legs feeling heavy and cold, the blood trickling into your shoes. You might encounter a fellow gatherer on the path, and you both share a grim, knowing look at each other's bandaged limbs. It's a specialized kind of misery. You've heard that some gatherers use old horses to lure the leeches, but horses are expensive. Your own skin is free. As you approach the apothecary's shop to sell your catch, the smell of dried herbs and formaldehydes meets the swampy scent of your clothes. The apothecary looks at your harvest with a clinical eye, paying you a a pittance for the live ware that will soon be applied to a nobleman's temple to cure a headache. You realize that in the grand hierarchy of medieval jobs, you are the ultimate silent partner in the medical world. You take the pain so someone else can feel balanced. It's a quiet, slow motion sacrifice played out in the mud and the reeds of the world's forgotten places. The fatigue of blood loss is a different kind of tired. It's a hollow, light-headed sensation that makes the world feel slightly blurred at the edges. You find a patch of dry grass under a willow tree, far enough from the pond that the dampness doesn't reach you. The sound of the wind through the willow branches is like a soft, rhythmic hushing. Let your heavy, bitten legs rest. The tiny stings are fading into a dull, pulsing warmth. Imagine the leeches in your basket, quiet and still as the light of the afternoon starts to mellow into gold. You've given a part of yourself to the day, and now the earth is inviting you to sink back into it. Close your eyes, feel the gentle hum of the dragonflies over the water, and drift into a dreamless, peaceful stillness where no one is asking for anything more from you. As the lightheadedness from the leech ponds begins to stabilize, you find yourself being led away from the murky outskirts and back toward the towering, cold stone walls of a royal palace. But you aren't here as a guest, and you certainly aren't the groom of the stool this time. You are young again, or at least you are occupying the role of a child. You find yourself standing in a lavishly decorated schoolroom filled with the scent of old parchment and expensive beeswax. Next to you sits a boy your age, dressed in silks and furs, looking bored as he struggles with a Latin translation. This is the young prince, the future of the kingdom. And you are his whipping boy. This is perhaps the most bizarre and psychologically taxing job in the entire medieval and Renaissance court. In this era, there is a very strict divine rule. Nobody is allowed to strike a prince, not even his tutors. The king is appointed by God, and his son's skin is considered sacred. However, the prince still needs to learn his lessons, and more importantly, he needs to learn discipline. So, when the prince fails his grammar test or throws a royal tantrum, the punishment has to go somewhere. That's where you come in. You probably wouldn't survive the sheer injustice of it. You have to stand there and take the lashes while the actual culprit watches from his velvet chair. It's a job built on the idea of vicarious punishment. You are the living, breathing lightning rod for the prince's mistakes. There is a certain miame, a deep, stinging irony in this relationship. To make the punishment effective, you and the prince have to be best friends. You eat together, play together, and share the same tutors. The idea is that the prince will feel so much guilt and empathy watching his only friend suffer for his laziness that he will eventually start behaving. It's a masterclass in psychological manipulation. You are the prince's closest companion and his literal punching bag at the same time. Historians often debate whether this actually worked or if it just created a generation of royal sociopaths who grew up watching their friends get beaten for their own amusement. Regardless, you are the one with the bruised back and the tear-stained face, while the prince just has to deal with a slightly bruised ego. You stand there in the dim light of the schoolroom, the tutor raising his wooden switch. You look at the prince, and for a second you see a flicker of regret in his eyes, or maybe it's just boredom. Crack. The first blow lands. You have to stay silent. It's a point of pride. You're a high-born child yourself, usually the son of a lesser noble, brought to court for this honor. It's an investment in your future. If you survive years of taking the prince's beatings, he will likely reward you with a massive estate or a high-ranking title once he becomes king. You are literally trading your skin for a future dukedom. It's the ultimate long game of career paths. But in the moment, as the switch falls again, the promise of a castle 30 years from now feels very, very far away. The atmosphere in the palace is a strange mixture of extreme luxury and extreme cruelty. While you're recovering from your shift, you might see the court dwarf or the jester, people whose entire existence is dedicated to being the target of the king's moods. There's a constant tension in the air, a reminder that in the world of the nobility, your value is entirely dependent on how well you serve the royal family's needs, even the need to vent frustration. You walk down the long, echoing corridors, your back stinging under your fine linen shirt, passing tapestries that depict glorious battles and heroic knights. You realize that the heroism of the court looks a lot different from the inside. Historians have found records of these boys later in life, and many did indeed become the king's closest advisors. They shared a bond forged in pain and proximity that no other courtier could match. But you have to wonder about the toll it takes on a child's mind to be punished for someone else's failures day after day. It makes the modern concept of fairness feel like a luxury that history simply couldn't afford. You might find yourself whispering a few jokes to the prince later that evening, a bit of dark humor to bridge the gap between your two very different realities. It's the only way to keep the resentment from curdling into something darker. As the sun sets over the palace spires, casting long, bloody shadows across the courtyard, the schoolroom is finally locked for the night. The prince goes to his soft bed with silk sheets, and you go to your quarters, where a servant applies a soothing salve to your back. The smell of the ointment, lavender, honey, and perhaps a bit of zinc, fills the room, masking the scent of the palace's ever-present wood smoke. You feel the cool relief spreading across your skin, a temporary peace in a life of assigned suffering. Let the heaviness of the day's lessons begin to fade. The sting is turning into a dull, warm throb that eventually melts into a general sense of exhaustion. You are lying in the quiet dark, the only sound the distant footsteps of a sentry on the battlements. Think about the silent bond you share with that boy in the other room, a bond built on a foundation of switches and Latin verbs. You have survived another day of royal education. The palace is settling into a guarded, opulent silence. Let your breath slow down, matching the rhythm of the flickering candle by your bedside. The pain is drifting away, replaced by the weightless sensation of a body that has nothing left to give. Close your eyes, let the velvet darkness of the court wrap around you, and fall into a sleep where there are no princes, no tutors, and no one is waiting to strike. The opulent, candlelit silence of the palace dissolves into a much harsher, colder reality. The lavender scent of the royal salve is replaced by the sharp, biting smell of vinegar and the heavy, metallic odor of wet earth. You are no longer a child in silk. You are a man in a rough, waxed cloak, and the year is 1348. The sun has long since set, and a thick, yellowish fog clings to the cobblestones of London. You are a plague barrier, or as the locals call you with a mixture of fear and pity, a bearer. This isn't just a job, it's a death sentence wrapped in a public service. While everyone else has bolted their doors and windows, stuffing the cracks with herbs to keep out the bad air, you are the only one moving through the streets. You are pushing a heavy wooden cart, its wheels creaking and groaning in the silence like a dying animal. Your task is simple but soul-crushing. You collect the harvest of the great mortality. You probably wouldn't survive the first night, not because of the physical labor, but because of the sheer weight of the despair. Every few yards, you have to stop and ring a heavy iron bell. Its chime is flat and mournful, cutting through the fog as you call out the famous chilling refrain, "Bring out your dead." You aren't greeted with handshakes. You are greeted by terrified shadows who drag wrapped bundles to their doorsteps and then vanish back into the darkness. There is a certain miyame, a cold, haunting irony in your role. You are the most feared person in the city, yet you are the only one doing the work of mercy. Without you, the city would literally choke on its own demise. You are the janitor of the apocalypse. You lift the heavy, linen-wrapped forms and stack them into your cart. You've learned not to look too closely at the faces or to notice when a bundle is too small. Historians often debate how these men kept their sanity. Many were recruited from the ranks of the already desperate or the recently recovered, who believed they were now immune to the pestilence. You drink a lot of strong ale and chew on bitter herbs, hoping the miasma doesn't find its way past your vinegar-soaked mask. The cart is getting heavier now, the wooden axles screaming under the load. You begin the long trek toward the plague pits located outside the city walls. As you walk, you hear the distant, muffled sounds of people praying behind closed doors, or the occasional crazed laughter of someone who has finally snapped. You feel like a ghost walking through a world that has already ended. You might pass a fellow bearer coming from the other direction, his cart empty, his eyes hollow. You don't speak, you just nod, a silent acknowledgement of the brotherhood of the bell. Historians have discovered these mass burial sites in modern day London during subway construction, finding thousands of skeletons laid out with surprising care, suggesting that even in the chaos, people like you tried to maintain a shred of human dignity. The air at the burial pit is thick with the smell of quicklime, which is tossed over the bodies to eat the flesh and stop the spread of the disease. You spend the next few hours unloading the cart, your muscles screaming with a fatigue that feels more like a fever. There are no prayers said here, just the rhythmic thud of earth meeting linen. You find yourself thinking about the whipping boy or the groom of the stool we met earlier. Their jobs were gross, sure, but at least their customers were still breathing. You are a servant to a master who never speaks and never pays, except in the cold coin of silence. As you finish the last of the work, the sky begins to turn a bruised, sickly purple. Your shift is over, but you don't go to a warm home. You go to a secluded hut on the edge of the marshes, where you are quarantined from the clean people of the town. You sit by a small, sputtering fire, the heat barely reaching your chilled bones. You wash your hands in a bucket of stinging vinegar, the liquid turning cloudy in the dim light. You realize that your life has become a series of latches: the latch of the cart, the latch of the bell, and the latch of the gate that keeps you away from the living. The exhaustion of the plague barrier is a heavy, leaden thing. It's not just in your muscles, it's in your very soul. You lean back against the rough wooden wall of your hut, listening to the wind whistle through the reeds. Let the sound of that distant, ghostly bell fade from your ears. The carts are still, the pits are covered, and the city is holding its breath until the morning. You've carried the world's grief on your back tonight, and now even the shadows are inviting you to rest. Feel the coldness of the night turning into a numb, protective cocoon. The bells have stopped, the streets are empty. Close your eyes and let yourself drift into a deep, dreamless void where the air is clear, the weight is gone, and the long, dark winter of the 14th century finally falls silent. The heavy, somber toll of the plague bell finally stops echoing in your mind, replaced by the crisp, biting air of an early morning in 19th century Britain. You are no longer surrounded by the shadows of the Black Death. Instead, you are standing on a cobblestone street beneath a gas lamp that is just beginning to flicker out. The year is 1850, and while the Industrial Revolution is roaring in the factories, the world hasn't quite figured out how to replace the human body with a machine for every task. You are holding a long, slender bamboo pole with several stiff wires attached to the end. You are a knocker-up, the human alarm clock of the working class. This job is a study in precision and quietude. Before the mechanical alarm clock was affordable or reliable for the average factory worker, they relied on you to make sure they weren't docked a half day's pay for being late. Your shift begins at 3 a.m., a time when the world feels like it's made of glass, cold, clear, and easily broken. You probably wouldn't survive the sheer discipline required. You have to navigate the maze of back alleys and tenement houses, remembering exactly which window belongs to which client. You don't just bang on doors. That would wake up the whole street and get you doused with a bucket of night soil from an angry neighbor. Instead, you use your long pole to gently but persistently tap on the glass of a second-story bedroom. Tap, tap, tap. There is a certain miyame, a gentle, rhythmic irony in your existence. You spend your life waking people up so they can go to jobs they probably hate, while you yourself are a master of the in-between hours. You are the guardian of the city's punctuality, yet you exist in a state of perpetual jet lag. You move like a ghost through the morning mist, a solitary figure with a stick, tapping out a code of labor. Some knocker-ups even used pea shooters to hit higher windows, firing a barrage of dried peas against the glass until a sleepy face appeared. Historians often point out that you wouldn't leave until you saw a sign of life, a candle flickering on or a hand waving you away. You are the first human interaction of their day, a rhythmic reminder that the factory whistle is waiting. The air is thick with smog, that classic Victorian blend of coal smoke and river fog. As you move from house to house, your lungs feel the grit of the city. You might pass a coffee stall man setting up his cart, the smell of burnt chicory and stale bread providing a momentary comfort against the damp. Historians debate how many of these knocker-ups there were, but in industrial towns like Manchester or London, hundreds of people made a living this way, often elderly men or women who couldn't handle the heavy lifting of the mills anymore. You are part of a delicate social ecosystem. If you oversleep, 100 other people oversleep, the mill doesn't start on time, and the gears of the empire grind to a halt. The pressure is silent, but it's there, vibrating in the bamboo pole in your hand. You find yourself standing outside a particularly grimy tenement. You reach up, tapping the glass where a young spinner lives. You hear a groan from inside, the sound of a thin mattress creaking. You wait. A few seconds later, a small light appears. Mission accomplished. You move on to the next. Your arm is tired from holding the pole aloft, a dull ache settling into your shoulder blades. It's a repetitive, lonely labor, punctuated only by the distant clatter of a horse-drawn hansom cab or the whistle of a steam engine in the docks. You think back to the gong farmer or the plague barrier. Their jobs were visceral and loud in their own way. Your job is a whisper. It's the absolute worst because it denies you the very thing you are selling, a full night's sleep. As the clock on the town hall strikes 6 a.m., the city starts to change. The knocker-ups are disappearing back into the shadows as the streets fill with the knocker-offs, the workers heading into the gates. The sun is a pale, sickly disk behind the chimney smoke. Your work is done. You collapse the sections of your bamboo pole and start the walk back to your own small room. The irony is that now, as the rest of the world is loud and bustling, you have to try and find sleep in a house that vibrates with the noise of the day. The exhaustion of the knocker-up is a thin, wiry kind of tired. It's a nervous energy that makes your eyelids heavy, but your mind stays sharp, listening for a tap that will never come for you. You lie down on your bed, the sounds of the street outside, the shouting of hawkers, the iron-rimmed wheels on stone, becoming a chaotic symphony. Let the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of your own memory become a metronome. Imagine the long bamboo pole leaning in the corner, its work finished. The city is awake now, fueled by the punctuality you provided. Feel the cool morning air through the cracks in your window, a sharp contrast to the warmth of your blanket. The fog is lifting. The world is moving, but for you, the day is ending before it has even begun. Close your eyes and let the distant sounds of the Industrial Revolution fade into a low white noise. You've held the clock back for everyone else. Now, let time stand still for you. Drift into a sleep that is deep, undisturbed, and finally your own. The rhythmic tapping of the bamboo pole fades into the distance, replaced by the intense, dry heat of a massive stone oven. You are no longer in the foggy streets of London. You are in a bustling medieval bakery at the break of dawn. The air is thick, but not with smog or plague. It's a heavy, suffocating cloud of fine white flour and the yeasty tang of fermenting dough. You are the master baker's apprentice. And while baker sounds like a cozy modern hobby, in the Middle Ages it was a high-stakes, physically punishing profession. You are the guardian of the village's primary food source, and in a world where a bad harvest means starvation, your job is governed by the assize of bread and ale, a set of laws so strict they make modern health inspections look like a suggestion. Your shift started at midnight. You've spent the last 6 hours kneading massive troughs of dough by hand. No mixers, no machines, just the weight of your shoulders and the strength of your back. The dough is thick and resistant, like working with wet clay. You probably wouldn't survive the heat. The oven, a giant cavern of brick and fire, radiates a temperature that makes your skin feel like it's being slowly toasted. You are constantly moving between the freezing draft of the back door and the blistering mouth of the oven. Your eyes are perpetually red and watering from the wood smoke, and your lungs are coated in a layer of flour that, when mixed with your breath, basically turns into a thin paste of bread in your chest. There is a certain miyame, a warm, crusty irony in your situation. You are surrounded by the most delicious smells in the world, yet you are likely too exhausted and nauseated by the heat to eat a single bite. Furthermore, you live in constant fear of the scales. Every loaf you produce must weigh exactly what the law dictates based on the current price of wheat. If you are caught selling a loaf that is even a fraction too light, or if you Stretch the flour with sawdust or chalk to save money. The punishment is swift and public. Historians describe the baker's hurdle, where a dishonest baker was tied to a wooden frame and dragged through the muddy, waste filled streets with the underweight loaf tied around his neck. You aren't just a cook, you are a man walking a tightrope between a successful bake and public humiliation. As you slide the long wooden peel, the paddle used to move bread, into the depths of the oven, you feel the hair on your arms singe. It's a delicate dance. You have to know the hot spots of the oven just by the color of the stones. You've heard the old bakers talk about the baker's dozen, the practice of giving 13 loaves for the price of 12, just to be absolutely sure you didn't accidentally cheat the customer and end up on the hurdle. Historians point out that this wasn't about generosity. It was about pure, unadulterated legal survival. You are an artist of the hearth, but your canvas is a legal minefield. The flour dust settles on everything, your eyelashes, your hair, the sweat on your brow, turning you into a ghostly figure, much like the knocker up in the fog, but white instead of gray. You might share a silent, weary nod with the water bearer who just arrived with a fresh barrel for the next batch of dough. Water is heavy, the wood for the fire is heavy, the flour sacks are heavy. In the medieval world, daily bread was earned through a literal ton of physical exertion. You find yourself leaning against a cool stone wall for just a second, your muscles twitching from the repetitive motion of kneading. Historians still debate the prevalence of ergotism during this time, a fungus that grew on rye and could cause hallucinations, or St. Anthony's fire. As a baker, you are the gatekeeper. If you aren't careful with the grain you accept, you could accidentally send the whole village into a collective, terrifying fever dream. It's a lot of responsibility for someone who hasn't slept in 24 hours. You look at the golden brown crusts emerging from the oven, the steam rising in the cool morning air, and for a moment the pride of the craft flickers in your tired heart. But then you remember the kneading trough is waiting for the second batch. As the village begins to wake up and the first customers line up at the window, your world starts to tilt. The heat of the bakery is becoming a heavy, numbing weight. You've been awake since the stars were out, and the sun is now a bright, unforgiving eye in the sky. Your work is done, but your body is still vibrating with the rhythm of the dough. You find a small, shaded corner of the flour store, away from the heat of the ovens. The smell of the fresh bread is still there, but it's becoming a soft, comforting background note. Let the white dust on your skin feel like a light, cool powder. The sound of the crackling fire is fading into a gentle whisper. Imagine the heavy kneading troughs, now empty and clean. The village is fed, the law is satisfied, and the hurdle remains empty today. Feel the deep, doughy softness of your exhaustion pulling you down. Close your eyes, let the warmth of the bakery turn into a cozy, protective cocoon, and drift into a sleep that is as rich and deep as a slow-rising loaf in the quietest hour of the night. The warmth of the bakery and the scent of yeast dissolve into a much colder, more solemn atmosphere. You are no longer surrounded by the living or the smell of life-sustaining bread. Instead, you find yourself in a dimly lit cottage in the Welsh marches, or perhaps the rugged hills of Shropshire. The air is thick with the scent of funeral herbs, rosemary and rue, and the low, rhythmic chanting of a grieving family. On a simple wooden table in the center of the room lies a body, draped in linen. This is where your shift begins. You are a sin eater. This is a job that exists on the very fringes of society, a profession that is as much a spiritual burden as it is a social curse. In this tradition, when a person dies suddenly without confessing their sins, their soul is at risk of wandering the earth or suffering in purgatory. To prevent this, the family hires you. Your task is to sit beside the corpse and perform a ritual that most people would find terrifying. A crust of bread is placed on the chest of the deceased, followed by a bowl of ale or wine. It was believed that the bread and drink would soak up the unconfessed sins of the dead person. You probably wouldn't survive the psychological weight of this. You have to pick up that bread, which has been resting on a cold, lifeless body, and eat it. You are literally consuming the sins of the dead, taking their spiritual transgressions into your own soul so they can rest in peace. There is a certain miyame, a haunting spiritual irony, in your role. You are a redeemer of souls, a Jesus-like figure for the local community. Yet because you are full of sins, you are treated like a leper. People believe that your very touch is infectious, that your eyes carry the weight of 1,000 crimes you didn't commit. You live in a shack far from the village. You aren't allowed to enter the church, and no one will sit at a table with you. You are paid a pittance, perhaps a few groats, and a meal. But the real payment is the total isolation. You are the man who saves everyone's grandfather from hell, but no one will say hello to you in the street. Historians often debate the origins of sin eating, noting that it was a practice that survived in the shadows of the official church, which viewed it as a pagan superstition. Yet, for the poor and the desperate, you were the only insurance policy they had for the afterlife. You sit there, the fire in the hearth casting long, flickering shadows against the walls. You take a bite of the dry, heavy bread. It tastes of nothing but dust and the metallic tang of the room. You wash it down with the ale, feeling the liquid settle in your stomach like lead. You've just inherited a lifetime of lies, thefts, or perhaps even darker secrets, all for the price of a cheap dinner. The atmosphere is heavy with a silence that feels like it's pressing against your ears. You look at the family huddled in the corner. They watch you with a mixture of gratitude and disgust. Once you finish the meal, you are expected to leave immediately. There are no thank yous. In some traditions, you are even chased out of the house with sticks or stones to drive the sins away from the home. You walk out into the cold night air, the taste of the ritual bread still lingering on your tongue. You are a walking graveyard of other people's mistakes. You find yourself thinking about the plague barrier or the gong farmer. At least their work was physical. Yours is metaphysical. You are carrying a weight that doesn't show up on a scale, but it makes your footsteps feel heavier on the damp grass. As you trek back to your isolated hut, the moonlight through the trees creates distorted, skeletal patterns on the ground. You feel a strange, hollow exhaustion, a fatigue of the spirit. You realize that the absolute worst jobs aren't always the ones that make you bleed or sweat. Sometimes they are the ones that make you disappear from the world of the living while you're still breathing. You are a ghost who hasn't died yet. Historians have found records of the last sin eater in England as late as the early 20th century, a man named Richard Munslow, who reportedly took up the job out of a sense of duty after the death of his children. It's a job born of grief and sustained by superstition. You reach your small, lonely shack and sit on the dirt floor. The wind outside whistles through the cracks in the wood, a lonely, wandering sound that matches your own state of mind. Let the silence of the hills wrap around you. The sins you ate tonight are no longer your burden. They are just stories fading into the dark. Imagine the bread and the ale dissolving within you, leaving you light and empty once more. The room is cold, the fire is out, but there is a strange quiet peace in being the one who carries what no one else wants. Feel your heartbeat slowing down, matching the stillness of the night. The village is asleep. Their conscience is clear because of you. You've traded your social existence for their spiritual safety. Let the heavy darkness of the Welsh hills pull you down into a deep, dreamless slumber. There are no voices here, no judgment and no sins, just the cool gray mist of the morning, waiting to find you alone and at rest. The heavy, spiritual silence of the sin eater's hut slowly transforms into the sound of a cold, biting wind whipping across a desolate landscape. You are no longer in a cramped cottage. You are standing in the middle of a vast, treacherous bog in northern Europe. The sky is a flat, bruised gray, and the ground beneath your feet is a spongy, dark brown carpet of moss and ancient decay. You are a peat cutter. In a world before coal was easily accessible or wood became too expensive for the common person, peat was the lifeblood of the hearth. It was the only thing keeping the winter at bay, but harvesting it was a slow-motion battle against the earth itself. Your day begins when the frost is still thick on the heather. You are armed with a specialized spade called a slane, a long, narrow tool with a sharp wing on one side. Your job is to carve out heavy, wet bricks of turf from the waterlogged ground. You probably wouldn't survive the relentless, repetitive strain on your lower back. Every block of peat you lift is saturated with water, weighing twice as much as it will when it's dry. You spend 10 hours a day doubled over, slicing into the history of the earth. The bog is a hungry thing. It pulls at your boots with every step, a constant wet suction that threatens to swallow you whole if you lose your focus. There is a certain miyame, a cold, damp irony, in this work. You are harvesting the fuel for a fire, yet you are perpetually freezing. Your clothes are never dry, your hands are stained a deep, permanent mahogany from the tannins in the bog, and the moisture seeps into your joints until you feel as ancient as the preserved bog bodies that occasionally turn up under your spade. Historians often point out that these bogs were seen as liminal spaces, places between the world of the living and the dead. You might be slicing through a layer of moss that grew 1,000 years ago, uncovering a piece of wood from a forest that vanished before the Romans arrived. You are a miner of time, but your reward is just a pile of wet dirt that needs months of wind to become useful. As you stack the heavy turvies into small pyramids to dry, the wind cuts through your wool tunic like a knife. You are miles from the nearest village, surrounded by a silence so vast it makes your ears ring. The only sounds are the shuck-shuck of the spade and the occasional cry of a curlew. You've heard the stories of will-o'-the-wisps, flickering lights caused by swamp gas that lead travelers to their deaths in the deep pools. You don't fear them. You're too tired for fear. You only fear the rain. If a heavy storm hits before the peat is dry, a season's worth of work can turn back into useless sludge. Historians debate how these communities survived such grueling, isolated labor, but the answer is usually found in the necessity of the flame. Without your bent back and your stained hands, there would be no cooking, no warmth, and no protection against the damp that rots the lungs. You find yourself leaning on your slain for a brief moment, watching the mist roll in over the hills. Your breath forms small white clouds that vanish instantly. You think about the baker we met earlier, standing by his hot oven. You would trade your soul for a minute of that heat right now, but your reality is the cold, dark muck of the marsh. The tannins in the water have a strange effect. They preserve things, but they also toughen your skin until it feels like leather. Your knuckles are cracked and blackened, the bog water stinging the small cuts that never seem to heal in the damp air. You are a part of this landscape now, as much as the heather and the peat itself. You realize that the absolute worst jobs aren't always about the noise or the filth of the city. Sometimes they are about the crushing weight of the silence and the endless horizontal horizon that promises nothing but more of the same tomorrow. As the light begins to fail, turning the bog into a sea of ink, you pack up your tools. Your body feels like it's been carved out of stone. You begin the long walk back to your sod-walled cabin, your muscles vibrating with a dull, heavy ache. The walk is a rhythmic struggle. Lift, step, sink, repeat. The wind is dying down, replaced by a deep, hollow cold that settles into your marrow. Let the image of the vast, dark bog begin to blur. The peat you cut today is stacked and waiting for the sun, a silent monument to your endurance. As you reach your small home and light a tiny scrap of last year's dry turf, the smell is sweet and earthy, the scent of ancient life turning into heat. Let the flickering orange glow be the only thing in your world. Your heavy limbs are finally still. Feel the weight of the bog lifting, leaving you light and hollow. Close your eyes and let the warmth of the small fire carry you into a deep, mossy sleep, where the ground is firm, the air is dry, and the work of the seasons is finally at rest. The sweet, earthy scent of the peat fire lingers in your nostrils for a moment before it is abruptly choked out by the thick, acrid London fog of the mid-19th century. You are no longer on the desolate marshes. You are in the heart of a city that has become a sprawling, soot-covered behemoth. The ground beneath you isn't moss. It's a slick, treacherous layer of mud, horse manure, and coal ash. You are holding a frayed burlap sack over your shoulder, and your eyes are fixed on the gutter. You are a tosher, or perhaps a rag-and-bone man, one of the thousands of street finders who survive by scavenging the things the Industrial Revolution has cast aside. This is the absolute bottom of the Victorian social ladder, a job where you are essentially a human filter for the city's waste. Your day doesn't have a start time. It is a permanent state of hunting. You probably wouldn't survive the sheer sensory assault of the Thames shoreline at low tide. While the wealthy are promenading in Hyde Park, you are wading through the night soil and industrial runoff of the riverbanks, searching for bits of copper, silver spoons accidentally washed down drains, or even just old iron nails. Your hands are a permanent patchwork of scars and infections from the jagged debris hidden in the muck. You are a mudlark by day and a tosher by night, sometimes even venturing into the actual sewers, clambering through the brick tunnels with a lantern strapped to your chest, fighting off swarms of rats that are nearly as big as cats. There is a certain miame, a sharp, grimy irony in your existence. You are surrounded by the greatest wealth in the history of the world, yet you spend your life looking for value in its filth. You are the ultimate recycler. That bone you find in the gutter, it will be sold to a factory to be ground into fertilizer or used to make handles for the very cutlery the rich use to eat their dinner. Those rags, they'll be turned into high-quality paper. You are a vital part of the empire's economy. Yet if you were to stand still for too long, a policeman would move you along for being a public eyesore. Historians often point out that toshers could actually make a decent living, sometimes finding a tosh, a piece of valuable jewelry or gold that would pay for a month's worth of gin. The risk was incredible. The sewer walls could collapse, or a sudden rainstorm could send a wall of water through the tunnels, drowning you in a matter of seconds. You find yourself walking through a narrow, dark alley near Seven Dials, your bell ringing out a flat, tinny sound as you call out, "Any old iron? Rag and bone." You see a child run out to give you a bundle of moldy fabric in exchange for a tiny, cheap toy or a bit of candy. It's a trade of desperation. Your sack is getting heavy, the weight of 1,000 discarded stories pressing against your spine. You've found a broken brass hinge, a handful of horse chestnuts, and a wet, tangled mess of hemp rope. Everything has a price, no matter how small. You've learned to see the world not as a place of beauty, but as a giant puzzle of materials: lead, wool, bone, glass. Historians still debate the Great Stink of 1858, a time when the river became so foul that Parliament had to be draped in curtains soaked in chloride of lime. You lived through it every day. To you, the stink wasn't a political crisis, it was just the atmosphere of your office. You look at your reflection in a stagnant puddle, and you see a man whose skin has taken on the gray, leathery texture of the city itself. You are a creature of the cobblestones. You find yourself thinking about the peat cutter in his lonely bog. At least his dirt was clean, ancient earth. Yours is the fresh, toxic grime of a million people packed too closely together. The sound of the city is a constant, grinding roar. The iron wheels of omnibuses, the shouting of costermongers, the distant thud of a steam hammer. It's a machine that never sleeps, and you are the one picking up the bits that fall out of the gears. You feel a deep, throbbing ache in your feet, a fatigue that comes from walking 20 miles a day on hard, uneven stone. Your sack feels like a lead weight, and the damp cold of the evening is beginning to seep through your many-layered, mismatched rags. As the gas lamps are lit, casting a sickly yellow glow over the fog, you head toward the Rag and Bone yard to weigh in your finds. The yard is a chaotic heap of everything the world has forgotten, smelling of rot and wet metal. You receive a few copper coins, just enough for a bowl of thin stew and a spot on a 4-penny coffin bed, a wooden box where you sleep upright, held up by a rope. It's a strange, cramped mercy. Let the roar of Victorian London begin to fade into a distant hum. Your sack is empty now, leaning against the wall. The coins in your pocket are cold and small. Imagine the fog thickening until it covers the grime, the rats, and the jagged glass, turning the world into a soft gray blanket. The hard stone beneath you is finally still. Feel the weight leaving your shoulders, your tired feet finally losing their sting. Close your eyes and let the soot-stained air turn into a cool, quiet mist. The city is still churning, but you have found a small, dark corner where the world can't find you. Drift into a sleep that is as heavy and silent as the bones at the bottom of your sack, far away from the hunger and the noise. The harsh, industrial soot of the Victorian streets begins to clear, replaced by the heavy, sweet aroma of roasted pheasant, spiced wine, and the delicate floral notes of rosewater. You have transitioned from the gutter to the Great Hall, but the change in scenery doesn't mean a change in the level of exhaustion. You are now a dresser, or a table servant in a high medieval noble household during a great feast. You are standing perfectly still against a stone pillar, dressed in a stiff, uncomfortable livery that fits you like a straitjacket. Your sole purpose is to be a silent, efficient shadow in a room filled with the loudest, most gluttonous people you've ever encountered. Your shift began hours ago with the meticulous setting of the trencher breads, thick, stale slices of bread used as plates, and it won't end until the last drunken guest is hauled off to bed. You probably wouldn't survive the physical and psychological torture of this role. You have to hold a massive, heavy silver platter of meat at shoulder height for 20 minutes at a time while the nobles debate theology or gossip about the king. Your arm muscles are screaming, vibrating with a fatigue that feels like a hot wire running through your shoulder. Yet if you flinch, spill a single drop of sauce, or even sneeze, the Master of Revels will ensure you spend the next week in the stocks. There is a certain miyame, a cruel, glittering irony to this position. You are surrounded by the most decadent food imaginable: boar's head, gilded marchpane, pies filled with live birds, yet your stomach is growling so loudly you're afraid the Duke might hear it. You are a human statue in a temple of excess. You watch the guests wipe their greasy fingers on the tablecloth or toss scraps to the dogs circling their feet, while you are forbidden from even licking a stray drop of honey off your own thumb. Historians point out that servants were often punished for looking with hunger at the food they served. You have to maintain a face of stone, a mask of total indifference, while the steam from a roasted swan rises directly into your nostrils, mocking your empty belly. The heat in the hall is stifling. Hundreds of beeswax candles are burning, and a massive fire roars in the hearth, intended to impress the guests, but succeeding only in making the air thick and oxygen deprived. You are sweating beneath your layers of wool and linen, but you aren't allowed to wipe your brow. You have to navigate a crowded floor filled with erratic, drunken knights, heavy furniture, and unpredictable pets, all while carrying delicate glassware that costs more than your village's entire annual harvest. One trip, one stumble, and your career, and likely your physical safety, is over. Historians often debate the hidden life of these servants, noting that they developed a complex sign language to communicate insults about the guests without ever making a sound. You share a quick, subtle glance with the wine pourer across the room, a split second of shared misery that is the only thing keeping you sane. As the night drags on, the and more of your job description begins to manifest. You aren't just a waiter, you are a facilitator of indulgence. You have to help guests who have literally eaten themselves into a stupor, providing vomit bowls so they can clear their stomachs and return to the table for the next course. It is a grotesque, high status nightmare. You find yourself thinking back to the gong farmer we met earlier. His job was objectively filthier, but at least he didn't have to pretend it was a grand, holy ceremony. You are a janitor in a silk shirt. The noise in the hall, the shouting, the lute music, the clatter of knives has become a blurred, percussive wall of sound that hammers against your tired brain. The fatigue of the servant is a quiet, suppressed kind of ache. It's the pain of not being allowed to be a person. You are an appliance, a piece of the room's decor that happens to have a pulse. You feel the weight of the silver platter in your hand becoming unbearable, your fingers going numb from the pressure. You realize that the absolute worst jobs are often the ones where you are closest to the top of the social ladder because you can see everything you're forbidden from having. You are a ghost at the banquet. As the final voide, the last course of wine and spices, is served, the guests begin to stagger out toward their chambers. The candles are flickering low, leaving the hall in a hazy, golden gloom. Your work is finally transitioning from standing still to moving fast. You and the other shadows descend upon the tables, clearing the wreckage of the feast. You grab a half-eaten piece of bread, a trencher soaked in meat juices, and shove it into your mouth when no one is looking. It's cold and soggy, but it tastes like a miracle. Let the sounds of the fading revelry drift away into the stone rafters. The heavy silver platters are back in their chests, the dogs have fallen asleep in the rushes, and the great fire has turned to a heap of glowing embers. Your livery is finally unbuttoned, the cool air hitting your sweat-soaked skin with a sharp, refreshing sting. Imagine the long, silent corridors of the palace as you walk toward your pallet of straw in the attic. Your arms feel strangely light now, almost as if they are floating. The weight of the Duke's expectations is gone. The smell of the roasted meats is being replaced by the simple, clean scent of the night air coming through a small arrow slit window. Feel the deep, throbbing pulse in your feet slowing down. You have served the world, and now you can finally serve yourself the gift of silence. Close your eyes and let the grandeur of the hall dissolve into a soft, dark nothingness. The feast is over. The guests are gone. Sink into a sleep that is private, quiet, and entirely yours. The echoes of the great hall's laughter and the clatter of silver finally fall silent, replaced by the most familiar sound of all, the soft, rhythmic breathing of a person in a quiet room. You have traveled through the vats of the fuller, the dark pits of the gong farmer, and the glittering, hungry halls of the nobility. Now you find yourself back in a space that feels remarkably like your own. The year is no longer a specific date on a dusty chronicle. It is the timeless moment of the deep night. You are the survivor of history. This final role isn't a job you do for a master or a king. It's the quiet realization of the distance you've traveled. You are standing in a small moonlit room. The air is clear, free of the miasma of the plague, the sting of the dyer's woad, or the suffocating heat of the baker's oven. You probably wouldn't survive the transition back to the past if you had to go today. But as you stand here, you feel a profound sense of gratitude. You realize that your modern life, with all its stresses and worst days, is built atop a mountain of endurance. Every comfort you touch, the soft fabric of your shirt, the sturdy walls of your home, the food in your kitchen, is a legacy of those who did the absolute worst job so that the world could keep moving forward. There is a certain irony, a beautiful, gentle irony, in this final thought. We look back at these jobs with a shudder, yet the people who did them were the real architects of the future. They were the ones who kept the cities clean, the people fed, and the fires burning. You aren't just a witness to their struggle. You are the reason their struggle mattered. Historians often look for the big moments, the battles and the treaties, but the real history of humanity is written in the callus on a peat cutter's hand and the patience of a knocker-up. You carry their DNA, their resilience, and tonight, you carry their stories into your dreams. The world outside your window is peaceful. The distant hum of a car or the soft click of a cooling radiator are the only sounds of your era. They are tiny, gentle whispers compared to the roar of the water wheels or the tolling of the funeral bells. You feel the physical weight of all those centuries of labor finally lifting off your chest. Your arms, which held the heavy silver platter, feel light. Your feet, which walked the treadmill, feel weightless. Your mind, which carried the secrets of the sin eater, is becoming a blank, clean slate. Historians might tell you that the past was a dark place, but as you prepare for sleep, you see it as a long, flickering chain of lanterns, each one held by someone working a job they never asked for but performed anyway. You are the last link in that chain. You don't have to stir a vat or ring a bell. Your only task now is the most natural one of all. You are entering the golden age of rest, a time where the only thing expected of you is to let go. The moonlight on your floor is a soft, cool white, like the flower of the baker's shop, but without the heat. The silence of the house is deep and protective, like the Welsh hills, but without the isolation. Everything is in its place. The history of work is finished for the night. The absolute worst is over, and only the absolute best remains, the chance to simply be. As you settle into your bed, feel the incredible luxury of your mattress, the impossible smoothness of your sheets, and the quiet safety of the air around you. The past is a story told in a book that is now being gently closed. The figures of the fuller, the leech gatherer, and the whipping boy are fading into a soft, colorful blur, like a tapestry being rolled up for storage. Let your breathing become as slow as the turning of an ancient moss-covered water wheel. Let your thoughts drift like the blue mist of the dyer's vat, thinning and vanishing into the night sky. You are safe, you are warm, you are finished with the day's labors. The long journey through the grime and the glory is over. The shadows are long and kind. The world is tucked in. Let the weight of your eyelids be the last thing you feel, a heavy velvet curtain falling on the stage of history. You have earned this peace. You have survived the worst of times to find the quietest of nights. Listen to the stillness. It's the sound of a world that no longer needs you to work. It only needs you to dream.